on this side of the Atlantic. Welcome to the November meeting of the Dubai Natural History Group. I'm extremely pleased to say that we seem to have turned a corner around the pandemic. Dubai statistics are getting better, and we conducted our first in-person UAE field trip in quite a while. The group was at Tel Abraq on Friday. That all went very happily and very smoothly, and we have additional field trips coming up in the next few weeks. At least one has already been announced by email. That's a hike to the Yabana landslide. Several others are coming up in the next few weeks and into January. For those, watch your emails. Members, watch your newsletter, and non-members can check our website. Except that field trips, we are a membership organization, and field trips are limited to members. We are not a tour group offering services to the general public. I'm pleased to say that our lecture schedule is all booked for several months ahead. I'm just going to mention the next two upcoming lectures. The December lecture deserves special mention because it's going to be a non-standard format. We have ceded our monthly place to a program that's being put together by NYU Abu Dhabi, and they will be having 2 nights of natural history oriented lectures on December 6 and 7. That's the end of the National Day period, and those are going to be 6 to 8 in the evening, and they will be a medley of short talks about UAE natural history, and this is in honor of on the occasion of the 50th anniversary. They're celebrating the UAE's environment and biodiversity. It's a small country, but it has many unusual and world-class environments that are accessible. And so we will actually, DNHG will actually be a sponsor, but our sponsorship is basically limited to ceding them our evening place and advertising. So you'll hear more about that by an email and in the next newsletter. January is going to be, we'll be back on our normal schedule for the first Sunday of the month in January. We will again be on Zoom, and the talk will be on tiger conservation by Dr. Sanjay Gubbi. After that, we may be poised, the committee will be discussing this, we may be poised to go back to in-person meetings, and we will be considering the option of hybrid meetings, which will allow us, if we can work out the details, which will allow us some of the best of both in-person and Zoom meetings. Zoom in particular has allowed us to hear from some people who it would be harder to get in front of us in Dubai. And for all of that, again, check your newsletter and check emails. The reason I'm referring to emails and newsletter, for those of you that aren't necessarily on our list, the way to get on our list is to be a member. We are a membership organization. Our memberships are still, after 35 years or more, one of the best bargains in town at 50 dirhams a year for a single, and 100 dirhams for a family membership. And you can check our website for details about that. Our speaker tonight will be Dr. Dave Applin, who's going to talk about surviving ingenious strategies without legs. He's going to be talking about plants, not snakes. So if you tuned in for reptiles, maybe have a rethink. But I think you'll be happy you tuned in anyway. Those of you who read the blurb will know that Dave has had an interest in plants since childhood. It's possible that he still has genes from the first humans who became agriculturalists. But in any case, he has an interest in the diversity of plants, but also in particular in their growth and development. And he's been involved with several botanical gardens internationally. What brought him to the UAE was an association with the Sharjah Botanical Garden, which unfortunately has remained aspirational rather than active. I had the personal pleasure of joining him in the field on a couple of occasions, and although I'm pretty well familiar with UAE plants, I found his perspectives on looking at them, the kinds of questions he asked, the kind of observations he made, to be extremely interesting and valuable. And I can only say of him, as I have of a few other speakers in the past, that I wish he had come to the UAE sooner and stayed longer and shared his talents with us. But in any case, we're privileged to have him with us tonight, and I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Dave Applin.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Appreciate those words. I am one of those people who not in the UAE at the moment, so I'm taking the advantage of the pandemic and being able to speak to you from a rural area, very green area of the UK. You'll see that talking is Rebecca Webb. That's not a pseudonym. It's my wife's machine, so just to explain that. Okay, so as Gary mentioned, the title is Surviving Ingenious Strategies Without Legs. Hopefully we haven't lost any people interested in snakes. And basically the talk is going to be a gentle foray across native plants of the UAE and mentioning some of those factors that Gary mentioned about how plants grow, how plants survive, such an extreme climate. At first, I was going to do this lecture with UAE plants and other plants, and I've decided that I'll only use UAE plants because it made it more challenging, shall we say, to do the research and to find out how some of these plants survive the climate that we have. So, now, apologies for those who are obviously resident and know the UAE very well. I'm just going to spend a few minutes, which may enable a few more people to join us. Just a few minutes explaining a little bit of background about the UAE, etc. So the UAE is situated in West Asia and on the Arabian Peninsula. Using the standard international measurement, the UAE is about 4 times larger than the country of Wales. It is divided into 7 emirates, which are relatively independent, with an overarching national structure. If you look at the map, the different color patches correspond to photographs taken on my mobile phone. So the darker, the redder the patches, the more photographs I took and the more interesting the sites were. So you'll see quite a lot in the Haja Mountains there, and these are some of the areas that I will be talking about from some of the plants there. Firstly, some people may be surprised at the diversity of habitats within the UAE, especially if you haven't visited. Before I visited, I was totally unaware, so this is for those people. Certainly, you get deserts, and that makes up majority of the land area, the sand deserts. But there's also some wonderful mountains, such as the Haja Mountains, and this borders Oman. And it holds the majority of plant diversity in the United Arab Emirates. They reached to about an altitude of 1,500 meters and over in places, and they comprise of very many mountain wadis such as this. So the mountain wadis are normally dry. Sometimes they are roads across the deserts, but when it rains, they quickly become flash floods and rip away all of the vegetation that's not strongly rooted. A little bit about how I got to the UAE, Gary briefly mentioned. My role was to develop a botanic garden for His Highness the ruler of Sharjah, seen here. We did develop a garden plan. We hired Grimshaw Architects, who designed the Sustainability Pavilion at Expo 2020, which some of you may have visited. They also designed the Eden Project in the UK, so a very high quality architectural firm. They came up with the design, even a model, which you can see with the ruler there. Sadly, the project, for a few reasons, didn't break ground, and it's been placed on indefinite hold. I'm certainly not holding my breath for it to start again. So the emphasis of my job shifted slightly, and I became the acting director of the Sharjah Seed Bank and Herbarium. So hopefully a few people may have joined us, and I will start the bones of the talk. So what I've done broadly is divided this presentation into a number of different topics, from flowering, traveling, growing, surviving. And I'll be talking about plants that fit into those categories. Now, obviously, in reality, many plants should be in multiple categories. So it's a very loose structure, which I'll have for this talk. And also, I've just used plants that I've witnessed myself in the field, and all of the photographs, apart from one, are my own photographs. So these are very much a personal account of my relatively very short time in the field in the UAE. So we'll start off with flowering. This is a plant called Desmadorcus flava. It's a plant which comes from a very specialized family, the Apocynaceae, which are considered very close to, in evolutionary terms, to orchids. They've got extremely specialized flowers, whereby some of the male and female parts are joined to create interesting flower parts that you don't get in other flowers. So the structures are actually can be quite complicated. As you'll know with orchids, they mimic um, often traits through chemical or even sight. They may mimic, for example, bees, so the bee orchid, to attract bees for pollination. This family and certainly the ones that I'll mention do that as well. So Desmadorcus flava, which you can see there, is a very interesting mimic. And it's certainly not the shape, but it's more the scent that it gives off and the colour. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a urine mimic. So the colour of the petals and the volatile odours that are made up of 63 different compounds means that they are highly scented and they smell like urine. And the reason that they hypothesize that the scent is so strong, although to be honest, when I've smelt this in the field, I've not found it over strong, but I think it probably depends on the time of day and when during the flowering it occurs. Urine is probably less attractive for insects. For example, laying eggs into it is going to be a waste of time. There's nothing to nourish larvae, but you can get a good feed out of urine if you're an invertebrate. So basically, the idea, or so we think, is that it emits a lot of odor to attract insects to come to the flowers for purposes of pollination. Some of the chemicals are very similar to sex pheromones for beetles, and it is known that beetles visit this species, but it's not been totally observed of whether they pollinate them or not. But I suspect they probably do. This is what it looks like in the field. So a lot of people don't, surprisingly, don't actually see this plant very often in the field. I think mainly because it's hidden in plain sight. If you look at this image here, this is a plant which I walked past it was growing next to the track in the Harja Mountains. I walked past it, didn't see it, and it was only on my way back that I saw it there, and I was just dumbfounded how I could have possibly walked by without seeing it. But if you look at it, it's incredibly well camouflaged with the colour and the shape of the rocks. So a lot of people think these species, Desmadorcus flava and Desmadorcus arabica, are very rare. I would say that whenever I was in the Harja Mountains, I would expect to see them. I would expect probably to see 3 or 4 plants. So if you're in the mountains and you're not seeing that, you're probably just missing them. So in order to have an idea of where they come from, I've got a little bit of video which saves my voice a little bit. And there's 2 things that I'd like you to notice. The first is right at the beginning of the video, you will see the ends of the petals have little trichomes that waver in the wind. And the next thing which I'll show you is the location of where they grow in the wild. So I might play it back twice just in case. So you can see the trichomes moving. And this is the habitat. This is where you need to climb in order to locate them. So I'll play that again. If you look closely at the trichomes at the ends of the petals here, it's thought that they are visual attractants for pollinators. So a beautiful spot to grow. And another plant that I saw. So, as you may have gathered, that was me doing a bit of recording in situ, which certainly helps my voice when I'm presenting. So you'll see a few of those today. As you see, the plant is very succulent. It has no visible leaves, so it's well adapted for dry conditions. In my experience, I quite often find it near a overhanging rock. That may be luck, but that's a common feature that I've found. So maybe gaining some shade at some part of the day, perhaps, and maybe that's just for germination. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Okay. So I mentioned there are two different species of Desmadorcus, the flava on the left-hand side and Arabica on the right. Arabica, not a urine mimic. It doesn't leave too much to the imagination to see that it resembles flesh. There are hair-like growths at the ends of the petals, which just like flava, but also the surface of the petals have a variable, almost hairy texture, whereas flava doesn't. And that hair-like texture is and patterning is thought to be a attractant for pollinating insects, generally carrion or blowflies. This is Periploka, so same family, Apocynaceae. Used to be Asclepiadaceae, but that's an old family now. So it's Apocynaceae. And these are very hairy in comparison to the Desmadorcus that we saw just now. So they have lots of hair-like outgrowths, which are interestingly, each of those are just one cell in length, but very elongated cells. And a visual attractant is that they blow in the wind and they really do attract lots of flies. So if you see in the next picture, and I think I was with Gary when I took this bit of video, but if you have a look, you can see the flies doing their job. So these are, I believe, the regal blowfly, but I think there are some other species there as well. I'll just play that once more. So they're pollinating and drinking nectar. So moving on a little bit, one of the down from the mountains, one of the interesting species that I saw was the Zygopilum. Bean caper, I think, might be its common name. Sorry, I'm not great at the common names, so please forgive me. But I think the pictures of these plants will at least be very familiar to you. So Zygopilum is very common in the desert plains. It's extremely well adapted to the dry conditions. It has very small succulent leaves, and to be honest, if you look at it, you might think, well, there's not much going on there. But actually, the flowers are minuscule, and you can see, but however, sorry, the flower emits an incredible scent for insects, and it's like an island of biodiversity in the middle of a desert, where you see a lot of butterflies, lots of nectar feeding invertebrates, with especially bees, etc. Probably moths because of the white flower. Possibly moths are attracted to white flowers. And the leaves are also very modified and succulent, as you can see in that image there, which are adaptations to hold moisture. So an interesting plant. You'd automatically think that there was not much going on, but actually it's a hive of activity, and I would imagine a very important plant for lots of bees and pollinators. Just on my finger there's just the seeds of it, just giving you an indication. Somebody contacted me some time ago saying they'd never seen the seeds, and I happened to pass some, and I took that picture. So perhaps one of the most spectacular flowering plants, I would say, of the UAE is this little thing here. It's a wild carnation. It'd be interesting how many people have seen this. Sorry, how many have actually seen this in the wild? It's Dianthus crinitus. I was very fortunate because I think I come from horticulture. I think if I hadn't grown Dianthus and carnations, I don't think I'd have ever spotted it, because I spotted this initially when it was not in flower. And if you look at it when it's not in flower, it looks like that. Obviously, apart from the middle picture, it looks almost like a grass, maybe easily confused with a grass, blends in with the surroundings. But I noticed growth that is on the right-hand image, and I immediately knew that that was a Dianthus. So I was very fortunate enough to find that one. They also grow off in the shelter of perennial trees, so that further disguises them. But I got a little video, and this is the first one I'd seen flowering, and I'm talking on this video again, so it gives my voice another break. But let's have a look. So this would be pollinated by probably mainly Lepidoptera, butterflies, maybe moths. So it's an amazing species to have in the UAE records, and I would challenge people to guess that this came from a desert climate such as the UAE. So the next kind of section that I'm going to talk about is about living together and the alliances that plants have with other organisms. And this is quite an interesting one because it's quite often overlooked. But there is some interesting research out there that highlights the fact that we shouldn't look at plants as individual entities. They are often, as humans, collections of organisms. We've got more bacteria cells in our body than we have human cells, for example. And plants are by no means any less interesting. This is Ficus cordata. It used to be called salicifolia, I think, but apparently, I believe it's cordata. The plant on the right was one on, I think, on the first visit of this first trip I went with Gary. We located this specimen. This was in August. It was probably about 43 degrees, and I was drinking 5 liters in as many hours. A great time to be out. You don't see many people, but it is fascinating to be out in all seasons, to be able to appreciate how dynamic the UAE's flora and landscape is. So these are the fruits, and if you look at the picture in the middle, it's a fig. The fig has a hole in, and probably most of you will know, but some of you may not, that figs are pollinated by tiny wasps. So when the fruit is young, there's a small hole which the wasps climb into, and then they lay their eggs into the middle of the fruit, because the fig, the flower of the fig, is inside the fruit. So the wasps clamber around when they are laying their eggs, and then they hatch out, and the male wasps, I'm trying to, it's been a while since I looked at this, but you've got the male and female moths, and basically they have a good time in the fruit. And they pollinate it in that way. And the last picture there on the end is developing seeds within the fruit. So fortunately, the figs that we would buy in the shops, they're not pollinated by wasps, because they're not pollinated, but the wild figs are absolutely pollinated in that way, and there'll be a specific species for that particular fig. So it's an insect who's using the fig not only as a home, but also as a breeding ground, and for the larvae to grow and develop. A lot of you will be very familiar with Calatropus procera, or Sodom's apple. It is practically everywhere. You can find it in the desert. You can find it half buried in dunes, or you could find it on the pavement in Dubai. So this is quite an amazing plant, really. So much so, it's invasive in many countries, such as Australia, etc. So it is a problem. It does have an amazing ability to maintain growth, even when it's extremely arid conditions, and it thrives in areas that have about 15 centimeters of rainfall a year. It has a very deep taproot system, but it also has remarkable leaves. So these leaves are chiefly form the plant's resilience to the climate. They have the ability to change their thickness and size in response to how arid the conditions become. And this helps the plant to conserve energy. They're able to maintain a very high photosynthetic rate with using very little water. So you can imagine in an arid environment, this is a fantastic strategy to have. The leaves are covered in wax, and this again reduces the moisture loss from those leaves, and also the white color helps reflect that sunlight. So these are very useful and important strategies if you want to be successful growing in a very arid climate. Beneath the surface of the leaves, there are canals which are filled with white latex. And if you're an insect wanting to take a munch out of the leaf, the white latex would basically gum up the mouth parts of the insect and prevent it from feeding. And it's also toxic to many insects. So it's very well protected. So these are the flowers, which I'm sure you've seen everywhere. But these plants are quite an important plant because they are food and shelter for many organisms. And research has looked into a number of organisms, not only on the plant, but within the tissues of the plant. So what researchers have done is they've taken leaf discs, which the picture on the left represents, and placed them onto Petri dishes. So the leaf was sterilized, surface sterilized, so that what was placed in the Petri dish was anything that was inside the Petri dish. And what happened was that a lot of endophytic fungi, that's fungi that live inside the plant that you'd never know existed, grew, and they found that there were over 11 different species of endophytic fungi in a leaf of this particular species. And these fungi are likely to not so much having a free ride, but they're important for the plant for protecting it from pests and pathogens and also herbivores. So you can see that this plant is incredibly well adapted, incredibly well defended, and you kind of almost, if you live in the UAE, take it for granted. But it's quite a fantastic plant, I think, in many ways, and one that could potentially be used a lot more for landscaping. You wouldn't need to water it then. There was a plant growing at work, and every few weeks the gardeners would cut it down, and it managed to get to flowering every few weeks from being cut down to the ground. In fact, it takes 190 days from the seed germinating to it being mature to be able to flower. So it is quite an amazing plant. So about 85%, if not more, of all plant species have an association with a fungus. And there are endophytes that live in the leaves, but there are also, more importantly perhaps for some, fungi that live on the roots and in the soil of the plant. And these are called mycorrhizae. So they tap into the plant, into the cells of the plant, and reach out from the roots of the plant to increase the surface area of the plant's roots. And what happens is that the plant provides the plant provides the fungus with carbon, and in return, the fungus provides the plants with mainly phosphate, but it can also give the plant water as well and other nutrients. So wherever you are in the world, if you look at any plant, that plant will have mycorrhizae on. There are a few exceptions, and I think probably one of those will be one I'll talk about in a minute. But we shouldn't really look at plants as being just leaves and roots. They have these extended areas of mycorrhizae, and probably these mycorrhizae are very important for plants in deserts. It's been very little studied, but anything that increases the plant's ability to get nutrients and water are a major important factor for plants. Sandy soils, I'm running a soil testing company at the moment, so sandy soils, as I know, are very poor in nutrients. So if you can have a fungus that is linked into your roots that go and forage a much wider area, then you've got a greater chance of acquiring those nutrients, and that will benefit the plant. So my next picture, and apologies for the upturned shoe. I know it can be rude for some people or some cultures. But my next section is on traveling and how plants move around. Obviously, plants need to move around, and this is a plant which I probably took far too many pictures of in the UAE. It was situated just outside of my office building, and whenever I needed a screen break, I'd go and visit it and other plants as well. So this is that particular plant. It's called Nerada procumbens. It's an annual, and like the picture you saw just now, that if you go walking in the desert or cycling, these will attach to your shoes or wheels. So a fantastic mechanism for being able to move around. If you have a look at this example, you can see how well armored it is. Incredible spines on this, and quite variable as well. So there's a centimeter scale down the bottom of this image. Not only some of them are very variable in size, but also in how spiny they are. And it was once considered that there were different species, in fact subspecies, occurring of this, but it's been shown through molecular analysis that this is not the case, and there is just one species, Nerada procumbens. It is quite invasive, and I believe in Australia and many other places, so it's very well adapted. So you can imagine that the spines will get stuck into the feet of mammals, for example. However, the spines are not just for traveling, so it's only part of the story. So I'll explain about the spines in a second, but whilst I was taking my screen breaks, it rained on the 26th of November, and we had quite a lot of rain. And because I was interested in this particular plant, I went out there every few days to notice whether it was flowering or rather germinating. And firstly, I noticed the strange architecture of the seed. If you were to slice off the top of that seed, you would find a seed capsule, because what you're looking at there is actually technically called a diaspore. And a diaspore is a botanical language for a unit of dispersal. So what will get dispersed is this particular fruit, but within it there are 10 seeds, and you can see the 10 seeds in the middle of this picture here, the black parts. And what happened on day 9 after the rain, they started germinating, so fairly quick. If you look at the seed in this image, then you'll see there's spiny above, but below it's dead flat. And that's important, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So when they germinate in their masses, and you can see a sea of green, not grass, but Nerada procumbens. Interestingly, the seed germinates and the roots grow down the middle of the hole, so the hole in the middle. So here you can see 3 roots here, and that means that 3 seeds have germinated. The flat disc here, as opposed to the spiny bit, corresponds to the underneath of the fruit when it's attached to the plant. So what happens is that the seedlings will start to germinate and they'll grow down, and then if suddenly the rain dries up, they'll die. But when it rains again next, this diaspore will again send out some seeds to germinate, and it will keep doing that until it produces a mature plant, or all those 10 seeds have been wasted. So it's an effective mechanism. It's almost like keeping seeds in a seed packet and waiting for the conditions to be favourable for them to grow. So on day 40, it was a mature plant, and you can see the flower there. Interestingly, I looked at hundreds of these plants, and it was very rare to see the flowers, and that's because the flower only opens for a few hours and then it's gone. So this is the flower here, so I was quite fortunate enough to be able to take that picture. And then, interestingly, 10 days later, its life cycle was over. So this plant has gone from under 50 days from germination to dying, and it's created this woody seed structure. So we often talk about seeds as being annuals and perennials, but certainly in desert environments, they are quite often ephemerals, which means that they are very short-lived. So 50 days to produce a plant and set seeds from germinating is quite incredible, really. So I was fortunate enough we had a good population, so I could monitor them. What I did was I collected some diaspores and I put them in a test tube. And a few weeks later, I noticed there was something moving in the test tube. And this is what I found. So what happened is that these are parasitic wasps. So they'd obviously laid their eggs into larvae of something that was eating the seed, and they'd eaten the larvae, and they'd then hatched out into the test tube. I don't know what they are, only that they're parasitic wasps. There is some suggestion that there are more parasitic wasp species than there are beetles on Earth, but who knows? I would assume that they've not been studied. So an interesting activity if you're out in the field and you collect a few fruits or seeds, just to put them, make sure they're dry so they don't rot, but place them in a tube and see what comes out. I did this for a research project I was doing when I was working on Mycorrhizae in the UK. And I was looking at a leaf miner and a parasite that lives on the leaf miner. And we actually found a species which was first time it had been recorded in the UK. I say we, the people who identified them were at the Natural History Museum in London. But it's interesting, for all I know, this species of parasitic wasp may be something new. Who knows? Something that would be interesting to investigate, perhaps, for somebody. So the next plant I'd like to move on to is the Velcro plant, and I'm sure you know it if you've been in the mountains. It's a plant that sticks to your trousers. It's not unpleasant, but it has small hairs that just stick to everything. It's the same family as the stinging nettle, for those who know that, but fortunately this one doesn't sting. And there's a plant growing in situ on the left, a close-up of the hairs in the middle, and the flower on the right-hand side. So interesting, we were talking about diaspores before being a unit of dispersal. Sometimes whole plants of the Velcro plant can be that unit of dispersal. I've read papers that have said that the plant breaks off and it blows in the wind, and then it releases its seeds as it travels. I've not witnessed that myself, but I've certainly come home with branches, stems attached to my trousers, and they had fruits on them. So certainly a good way of dispersal. So once when I was in the mountain, I noticed a plant which had a butterfly attached. And interestingly, this is actually a different species of the Velcro plant. But you see, this butterfly has actually been attached to the spines on the leaf. So interesting to witness. One of my perhaps favorite plants is a chuca, which is a member of the lettuce family. This is chuca orientalis. Not often seen in the UAE, only a few sites, and witnessing this particular plant was a first for that particular site in the UAE. It's Asteraceae, which is amazing because this flower does not look like an Asteraceae. So it's quite an attractive thing, especially when it's young. You've almost got this snakeskin bark on the plant. Its dispersal is through seeds. Just like a dandelion or many other Asteraceae, but you only have I think maximum of 4 seeds per flower head. This is it growing wild, and this is actually growing on a rock surface. But if you have a look at the rocks anywhere in the UAE, this is what you'll find. You could take whole mountains apart quite easily with your fingers if you really had the time. So you can see how they carve great big chunks out of the mountains. So this is basically all these bits of stone make up scree. And I was fortunate enough to take one of those seeds that you just saw, and I grew one in a pot in my home here, and it grew quite well. But then I noticed that at the bottom of the pot came a shoot, so it was obviously propagating by its roots as well. So it's actually a great strategy to have if you're growing in scree and you have the ability to be able to sprout out from your roots. It's a great survival tactic. And also if you're growing on a cliff edge, for example, then it's a great way to creep along that cliff edge and expand. So the chuca is a little bit similar to another Asteraceae. This is Lornia, born Mulleri. And you can see the very typical flower there for Lornia. But if you compare it with the Lactuca, you can see how different it is. In fact, I have to be honest, when I saw the Lactuca flower and I didn't know what it was, I had no idea what it could be. So it was an email to Gary to try and find out what it was. If you look at this plant closely, you'll see lots of spines on it around here, and that protects the young growth. So the spines are the old inflorescence, the old flowering shoots from the year before, which are retained and then become a defense so that it doesn't get nibbled by grazers. So if we look at this video, so that's what it looks like in the wild. Quite an interesting plant. Moving on to another dispersal way of propagating itself. This is called Comicarpus stenocarpus, which again is quite a not sure rare, but shall I say not very well recorded plant of the UAE. And this is one that I discovered in a new area in Masafi. If you look at these are the fruiting bodies, and what happens, you can see these got glands upon them. What happens if you brush past them, or an animal does, and it sticks to your clothing. So it transports the whole seed pod somewhere else. And this is a video I made, I think. Maybe not. Nope, that's not working. Okay. So it's certainly an interesting plant and one worth looking out for. So another category is growing and strategies that plants use in order to gain their sustenance. So obviously most plants just put their roots into the ground and their leaves in the air, and they get photosynthesis and nutrients from the soil. However, if you've got no leaves and no roots, like this parasite or a banky, then you have to rely on a host plant for nutrition. This orobanche is one that depends on members of the potato family, the Solanaceae, to rob in nutrition. They basically got very small seeds, less than 0.5 millimeter, and they only germinate when the seeds detect chemicals from the roots of the potential host plant. And when they germinate, they can only germinate a couple millimeters because the seeds are so small, and then the reserves are gone. So they have to be very close to the host roots. Because the seeds are so small, they don't have much energy, and that's why it has little ability to hunt out its host when it germinates. But once it does germinate and it detects a host, then it is able to attach onto the host root with a specialized structure called a haustoria, and this basically taps into the root. In reality, it's quite a complicated procedure, and there's a range of interactions going on between the host and the parasitic plant. And I guess it's a little bit like walking through a series of doors with a bunch of keys and locked doors. Only some plants are able to attach themselves onto their host plant. But once attached, it siphons off the nutrients, and it is also able to create hormones which facilitate the amount of nutrients that it receives from the host. So in effect, the host thinks that this plant is just a branch, and it just siphons off the nutrients as if it's a part of its own plant. So this has actually become quite a major agricultural pest in some countries, targeting plants from the potato family, such as tobacco. And the problem is you don't know this plant. If you're an agriculturalist, you don't know this plant's there until it flowers, because it's totally underground all the time, doesn't have any roots, and doesn't have any leaves, and is totally dependent upon the plant and robbing it from its nutrients. The plant that this particular plant was hosting upon is this one. It's Lycium shorii, which is a goji berry native to the UAE, obviously the potato family Solanaceae. And that picture we've seen. There are other parasitic plants in the UAE that I've been fortunate enough to see. The Cistaceae tubulosa, which is I think a desert candle or something like that. And there's a dodder, which is this plant here, which again germinates. It's less host specific, but it attaches directly to the host using these hystoria, these special structures, and it robs the plant of its nutrition, and usually climbs all over the plant, and just a mass tangle like it is there. Of course, it has no advantage of killing the plant, but because it needs the plant alive, because all these plants are annuals, so they die, they set the seeds, and then they start off again. Yeah, conscious I'm running close just after the hour, but we did start a bit later, so I hope that you'll be able to bear with me for a little bit longer. So now looking at strategies for living in hostile places. Many people would be surprised to know, I'm sure you won't be, but the UAE has quite a good collection of liverworts and ferns and algae, and there's just a selection of ones that I saw. I used to enjoy finding these. This is, for example, a stream in a wadi, and just showing you algae there, and the grass is growing. So ideal environments. Hold on, my computer is just giving up. Do you bear with me? I think it's probably gone to sleep. Is anybody there?
I can see an image.
Can you?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. I can't see anything. That's interesting.
There is an image there. Yes.
We're still with you there. It's your original, it's your first image of the algae coating rocks in the wadi.
Okay.
Started the video.
It's weird that I can't see a thing. Wonder why that is. There had to be a technical fault, didn't there?
I'm just trying to think what it might be, because all is okay here, and we are sharing amongst a lot of people.
I've also got a strange noise on my microphone. What I might need to do is just quickly go back and come back in, if that's
Okay.
Are we okay for time?
We're fine on time, Dave.
Okay.
We're getting. I repeat. I wish we'd heard a lot of this years ago.
Okay. Let me bear with me. Talk amongst yourselves for a couple minutes, and I'll try and get it back.
Okay,
Thank you.
fine.
Thanks for your patience.
I'll try and readmit you.
Okay. Oh, it might be. Becky? You still there?
I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah. I have no idea what's gone wrong with this screen.
Can you just back up one slide or two? That's my simple-minded equivalent of kicking the bumper.
I think he's left us, Gary.
Yes, he's definitely left us, but that at least is progress if the aim was to leave us and come back.
Yeah, I'm just watching out for him.
Yeah.
Second. 1 second. Okay, we're good to go again. Apologies for that. So I was talking about ferns and mosses and algae that grow in the UAE if you find the right site. I'd just like to show you 3 very brief videos here. One, unfortunately, with my mouth open, but I'll just show you it. So there you go. There's, if you want to find ferns and you find the mountain, north-facing slopes are fantastic. and Anincium shown here is probably the commonest fern species you are likely to find. The next one.
Dave, I have to break in to comment. It wasn't critical earlier, but I don't know if others are having the same problem. But I have not heard the video portion of the sound portion of any of your videos. And I see someone's got a message here that they're having the same problem. But I don't think you can count on us hearing the sound, so you may have to
fine.
annotate it a bit.
Okay, no, thank you for telling me that. The one that you just saw where flies were attached to my head, that was just explaining there that this is Anincium divaricatum, and it grows on a north-facing aspect of mountains, and usually on an overhang of a rock, and you can quite often find it growing there. This plant here is the maidenhair fern, which is Wadi Sheesh, near the pond area, so quite easily accessible, but a beautiful fern. It used to be native in the UK until it was collected totally, and this. Okay, so this is Jebel Jace and a wadi, and what I find, which isn't unusual, in a very shaded spot is some liverwort, which are looking extremely healthy. So liverworts in the UAE, which a lot of people wouldn't realise would exist. So quite a interesting flora there in the mountains. Whoops. Okay. If you go right up the top of the mountains, this is Glossonema varians, which is again a Epocanaceae. It's a beautiful plant. It has annual stems, so these stems grow and in the winter and they produce flowers. Then when it gets too hot, they die down and you wouldn't even know it was there apart from a few seed pods, and then it waits until the cooler weather before shooting out again. So basically a way that a plant overcomes, or this plant overcomes, an unfavorable season is to hide underground. You all know that the mangrove, Avicennia marina, dominates the coastal line and certainly would do even more than it is now. It is there because it can tolerate the salt. If you look at the leaf in the central picture, the whiteness on the leaf, that's basically salt being exuded from the leaf. So obviously there's too much salt in the water. It gets into the plant, but it gets rid of it by excreting it on the leaves. And if you didn't know, these little brown structures here that appear along the mud are breathing roots for the mangrove. So all roots have to breathe, and you can't breathe if you're in saturated mud. So it breathes by sticking up these interesting roots. So spiny plants are also a way of protecting yourself. This is Echinops here, which I really like this species. It looks like someone's having a snowball fight in the middle of a desert. But the young plants and the old plants, but the younger plant in the right-hand image is just full of spines, so nothing much is going to eat that. Blepharis ciliaris, the eyelash plant, again is full of spines, so extremely well defended, as defended as any cacti from the Americas. and this is the Centaurea, a knapweed, as we would call them in the UK, and this one, the involucre bracts around the flower, are just full of vicious spines. So it's again very well defended. Again, spines, convolvulus, acanthocladus, which grows in the mountains, and beautiful grey foliage, but full of vicious spines. And Gary here at a site which I can't remember exactly where it is, although I can picture it. This is Ochrodinus arabicus, a huge specimen growing in this gravel here, no competition. And you can see there's some massive spines there. The berries here for the birds, and obviously you have to be very careful to be able to get the berries without getting spiked on these massive spines. So conscious a little bit of the time, so I'm almost at the end. So this is quite an interesting plant, Leptodemia pyrotechnica. Pyrotechnica is comes from the word for fire, and if you look at the middle image, you can see the pappus of the seeds, and apparently they were collected to help light fires by people many years ago. Attractive flower, and a very short trunk. Some people do classify it as a tree. I guess it depends on what you want to, what your definition is of a tree. The interesting thing about this plant is that it has very deep roots and very spread out roots. So in a paper that I was reading recently, a very small bush, the roots can reach 11.5 meters deep and a spread each side of the plant of 10 meters. And it is estimated that the amount of water in that desert soil that it inhabits would be sufficient for that plant to survive for 4 years without any increment of rainfall. So quite a bomb-proof plant, really. So humans, well, what can I say about that? Gary would have seen the vast changes that have happened in the UAE. I was there relatively a short time, and I could certainly see the changes happening. This is Prosopis cinerea, the gaff tree, and I quite like this image because you've got these big lorries facing it. This is in the middle of a construction, but of course the tree, it's against the law to fell the tree. So it's saying there defiantly against these lorries, even though these lorries are being very intimidating. This was a new road that has gone from Sharjah to Corsican, scraping a huge amount of the rock, and of course you lose this beautiful russet brown of the rock once it's been taken off. So yeah, quite a scar. These are some of the, I would say, one of the most attractive areas in the UAE. However, obviously it was necessary for a road to go through. This is a site that Gary has visited with me a few times. This is my most favourite site in the UAE. It's near Masafi. It's an area that has two distinct geological bedrocks, and the majority of the interesting plants that I found have been in this area. If we have a look at this area and concentrate on this patch around here, and this is just another picture, we can see that during my time, excavations were taking place, and they were taking away the gravel from the site and slowly working their way up the hill. I would be possibly relaxed in that a lot of the more interesting vegetation is higher up. However, seeing what can happen and how quickly mountains can be carved up, I am a little bit concerned. And then, of course, another impact is the grazing that occurs. So, yeah, there'd be a lot more interesting flora if it wasn't for the grazing, and that's just one of the things. But then humans have to live in the environment, and we are part of it. It's just how we adversely affect that environment. So just moving on to my last slide, and I'd like to thank you for your attention, and sorry for the technical difficulty during the middle of this. Perhaps the recorded version will iron out that issue, but I'm very happy to attempt to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. I have sent out a message to everybody to ask questions, but I haven't got any coming through as yet.
Okay, that's easy.
Oh yes, it's starting.
Okay.
This is from Amelie Mouton. I've met with Bedouins in Ras Al Khaimah, and they said that the rainfall has dramatically decreased in the past few years. So that's just a statement more than a question.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, obviously, global warming is going to make a difference, and we don't know. Sorry, we don't know what's going to happen. Sorry, Emily, were you there? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, because I couldn't finish typing my question on time.
No worries.
So no, it's just because they said that a lot of plants actually disappeared from the mountain because they used to go to the mountain to collect the plants for, using for preparation, like for healing preparation or, cosmetic preparation. And they said that the amount of plants that disappeared is like huge. So I just wonder if this is something you've also noticed during your own research, or is it in the conversation here, like the fact that
I think I can't answer that in an authoritative way. All I can say is that in the 1970s, the UAE was very much a backwater, and I suspect that all the changes have happened since then. Dramatic development into the mountains, which is one of the most prized, or I think the most prized possession that the UAE has, and it's very sad to hear that a lot of the plants have gone, possibly through grazing as well. I have seen some interesting case studies, which I probably shouldn't comment about, but yeah, no, it is a concern, and maybe some people are monitoring that. I'm sorry, I can't. Maybe somebody here can give you a better answer than me waffling.
Can I interject on that? The
Please.
UAE climate, we know, has gone up and down, series of wet years, series of dry years, and so on. That's been up and down. What hasn't been up and down is the population of the UAE, the foreign population, but also the local population. And so to the extent that the people you're speaking with are missing plants that were used traditionally, if I had to bet on what's the most likely cause, it's that there's more there are more humans wanting to use those plants than that and there have been more goats and camels out grazing than there were in earlier years, than that it's a climate matter. Certainly the climate is overall getting warmer, but we have good data for the last 30, 40 years of rainfall here, and it's up and down. It's not just to the last few years.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to ask Leith, ask Leith to unmute, and he's got quite a long question to ask. Leith, can you?
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, Dave, thanks for a very interesting talk. I had a few questions. One that relates to soil, and working in the landscape industry, I realise how much topsoil is extracted from other areas within the UAE to be used in the landscape industry. One, I'd just like to ask if you think using native species plants could reduce the need for importing topsoil from other locations within the UAE. And two, have you seen, or do you have an idea about the scale of the problem regarding the sustainability of topsoil extraction?
Okay. One, certainly growing natives will aid not having to use topsoil, because they are UAE plants are used to very poor arid conditions. I think a lot of the time people use the topsoil is because it has more organic matter in it, and that holds the moisture. And growing exotic plants, that's what they're going to lack during the growing season. Also, there's the water element. If you grow native plants, then you're going to need much less water, hopefully no water, as they get established. I haven't personally seen anything with regards to topsoil extraction in the UAE, so I can't comment. I know that you can buy peat in the UAE, which is incredible, really. It's non-sustainable, and it's something that nobody should be using in horticulture. The UK has been trying to ban it for probably 35 years, and it's only just probably getting there. So yes, it is a problem, but growing native plants will certainly be a major answer to that problem.
Okay, thanks. And if I could ask my second question, so
Yep.
straight after that. You mentioned taproots as a strategy to ensure water supply. I'm just curious about artificial irrigation, of course, because we use that a lot in the irrigation industry. Does that discourage the development of taproots? And in the case of trees, what effect will this have on anchorage, if it indeed has any effect? Because I know that other lateral roots also provide anchorage.
Yeah, okay.
Comment on that.
Not all plants have taproots, for one.
Mm.
For those that do, I would imagine that they would be, if roots can find sufficient moisture in the top layer, then that is where the majority will be. For example, the Leptodenia pyrotechnica, which I mentioned, which I think would be a fantastic landscape shrub if pruned back regularly, that goes down to 11.5 meters, but within that 11.5 meter depth of soil, the roots basically colonize the wettest part of that soil. So if your wettest part of the soil is just on the surface, and that's where most of the roots will be, and then when you turn the taps off or a pipe breaks, that's when your plant will die. So that is the potential issue there. There are some soil ameliorants I'm trying to remember the name of, and I don't think I will during this answer. But they come from all over the place. One comes from Australia, and it's supposed to significantly increase the water retention of soils. So you're probably already aware of that.
There's Austral blend.
Yes, Austral blend. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
But it's in Europe somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, can I add one more question?
Sure.
And I think in fairness, I think in
No, I
fairness,
think we have to get, there are other people.
nice try. But I think in fairness, we really have to move along.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
because we have a few more questions, Gary. Do we, that people have got
Oh,
questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry. When I said move along, I mean we have to move along to another questioner. I think Dave is. I understand that we've gone on a little bit long, but I think this is the kind of opportunity that with the this is what the DNHD is here for. So we can hang on a few minutes, and certainly if I know it's late there, anyone who wants to leave is welcome to leave. Thank yous are assumed because it was an excellent presentation. But let's move to another question.
Okay. I'm going to ask Will Bennett to unmute. Will, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, what I'm going to say with you is one question, and then so others can have a turn.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dave, for a fascinating talk. My question was a fairly general one, just to ask you what you think are the potential opportunities, particularly with using native plants in designed landscapes and urban landscapes. And in particular, I'm quite interested in the opportunities of bringing a lot of these plants together in mixed plantings. And if you see that as something which might potentially work, or may not for some particular botanical reason that I'm not aware of. So be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's a huge opportunity for UAE plants to become a much more prominent part of the landscape scene within the UAE. And of course, there are no endemic species in the UAE, so we're talking Arabian Peninsula wide using native plants. I think the issue is that getting people to understand the reasons why they're used and to get people to appreciate their own flora. So that's what I think is of major importance there. I think as long as plants have the same type of environment, or they sort of keep the same kind of conditions, there's probably no reason for mixing UAE plants with other plants. So I can't see any concerns. The biggest concern, however, is supply. Where do you get UAE plants from? Now, one of the major things that I wanted when we're developing the Botanic Garden was to have a UAE plant nursery where we could supply plants, because we knew that by showcasing UAE plants, there would be a demand. And if the demand is not there, then some people might dig them up in the wild and they would obviously die. But the idea is to get plants available so that the landscape sector and individuals can purchase them if they want them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to now ask Nuri to ask a question.
Sure.
Nuri, can you go ahead?
Thank you for the opportunity. This is such an interesting talk by Dr. Dave Aplint, and I want to ask about the liverwort. I actually encountered a liverwort last year when the rain happened, when we have abundance of rain, and I took a specimen of it. I talked to Gary, and Gary said he will come back to me later on, but I think so we are busy with many things. So I want to ask Dr. Dave if any literature I can use for the identification of liverwort in UAE. Thank you.
I think there was a recent-ish paper that spoke about the ferns, but I also think it spoke about the liverworts. So I think probably the best thing, if you could send me your email, then I will take a look, find that paper, and send you the reference if I can't find the actual hard copy of the paper, if you like. In fairness to Gary, he's been extremely busy, so I'm sure he will get back to you. However, I'm happy to search if you can provide me with your email address.
Sure. I will send. I have your email, sir, so I will send you email.
Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thanks, Nuri. And I'm now going to ask Claudia to come on. She has a question, and I think we'll end it there then.
Sure.
Claudia? Hi, Claudia, are you there? She's not.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can now.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for this excellent talk. I really enjoyed it. And I have to tell you, you are the first that puts Calatropus procara into a good light. All the other botanists hate it.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't understand it because I find this plant pretty fascinating, and also its connection to the monarch butterfly. Everyone likes the butterfly, and everyone hates the plant. And this is what I absolutely, I don't understand it. So first of all, my question, the first question is when and how does the plant change the thickness of its leaves? And does it have any negative impact on other plants like Prosopis uliflora, or do you see no negative impact of this plant?
Okay. I think if it wasn't for humans, there probably wouldn't be a negative impact of this plant. I think humans create environments where this plant is able to be opportunistic and grow. And I think because it's so common, and you cut it back and it still comes back, and it's really difficult to wash off the latex, people get a bit fed up with it, unfortunately. So with regards to does it affect any I read a paper recently that mentioned that the leaf litter could reduce the germination ability of seedlings coming up around Calatropus. So I could try and find that paper, and if you particularly wanted to know more about it. There's also another good paper which specifically mentions about the leaf changing, and what it seems to be that as it gets hotter and drier, the leaf gets larger and thinner. Now, that would be the opposite to what I would imagine, because I would have thought that but according to this paper, that's what it tells me. And again, if you wanted me to send you a copy of that paper, I'm happy to do that.
Yes, please.
If do you have my email address?
Dave, can I put it? That's what I was going to ask you. Can I put
Yes.
the email address on for everyone and those? Who
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'll put it on now, and then they can email you, because there are a lot of more questions, and I think we should call it a wrap, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure, but thank you, Claudia, for your question. It's I think Calatropus is fascinating. I think the problem is it doesn't look as if it fits in anywhere. But if it's not native to the Arabian Peninsula, where is it native to? The moon? I don't know.
Yes.
It's an interesting plant.
Okay, Gary. Where's our friend Gary?
Yeah, there's just a time delay. Let me. We are on for a long time. We could certainly have gone on for more. I think I can sum up my thanks by repeating what I knew was going to be the case from having heard Dave's wisdom and experience before, which is that I wish, and now I think most of you wish, that he had come to the UAE sooner, that we had heard him sooner and that we had stayed longer, because we will all look at the environment and particularly the plants around us with a little bit of a different eye now. So thank you very much, Dave. We normally, in in-person lectures, we would have a small memento for you. I'll have to consider sending you a virtual memento.
No need.
Or you may simply get lots of emails from listeners. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing all of you at the program which we are sponsoring jointly with the NYU Abu Dhabi that's the 50th National Day celebration on the Monday and Tuesday, the 6th and 7th of December, and we'll get more information to you about details of that. Thanks very much, everybody.
And
thanks particularly to Michelle and Alexis and Pradeep and our other committee members who are making these things happen while I sit in New York waiting to get things together and come back and see you all. Thanks a lot.
right, just one last thing. Thanks very much, Dave. And thanks, Gary, for getting hold of Dave to give this presentation to us, because it's been really well received. I'm going to be sending an email to Dave requesting permission in email for the recording, because there's a lot of requests coming through now for the recording to be loaded. So I'll be sending that ip through tonight. So thank you for a really good talk. It's very well received. And many messages of thanks are coming through.
Well, everybody is very welcome. It's a subject that I'm passionate about. Unfortunately, it was beyond my control that my time in the UAE was, shall we say, cut short. But that's life. But hope to be one day back out in the field and looking at the plants again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay,
Thank you very
bye-bye.
much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to bring it to an end now. Thank you, everybody, for your attention, and we'll be putting a recording up as soon as we get the email. Thank you very much then. Good night, everybody.